That day, as I fastened the last button on my wedding dress, my mother-in-law walked through the door and said, "I hope this dress makes you look better than you actually do." It was my wedding day. I wanted to be happy, but those words froze me to my core. My hands trembled, my eyes stayed dry, because when a woman breaks, she either collapses or she hardens. I hardened. I hardened so much that 1,000 thoughts began racing through my mind. How could I build a family with this woman? Could I really tolerate her just because I loved her son so much? I hoped those words had slipped out by mistake, but what she did next would prove she meant every cruel word. Let me start from the beginning. My name is Charlotte Miller. I'm 52 years old, and I was getting married for the second time. My first marriage lasted 20 years, peaceful but lifeless. Then I met David Hayes. He was 55, elegant, mature. He had gray hair, blue eyes, and a soft voice. We met at an art gallery in Maplewood. I was exhibiting my architectural projects. He was a retired financial advisor who'd come just to browse. We chatted while he looked at my work. His conversation, his tone, the way he looked at me, it all affected me deeply. After that day, we started talking regularly, and within just 6 months, we were engaged. David was kind, thoughtful, and patient. He'd bring me flowers, we'd drink wine together in the evenings, we'd talk about the future. My children were grown, and life was opening a new chapter for both of us. I'd been running my own architecture firm for years. I had a small but respected practice in Austin, Texas. I was an independent woman, known for my designs. I thought there was a place in David's life where I could belong. But there was one detail I hadn't accounted for. Margaret Hayes. David's mother disapproved of me from the moment we met. "Aren't you a bit old for David?" she said, holding her Starbucks cup, her eyes cold and appraising. We were sitting in her small real estate office in Pinecrest County. David had brought me to introduce me to his mother. Margaret was 68, always wore makeup, always wore heels. When she spoke, her lips barely moved, whether from Botox or coldness, who could tell? Let's just say she had an irritating personality, but I thought I could tolerate it all for David's sake. Because I love David, and you're an architect. How much do you make? Margaret asked. You know David has a comfortable retirement. Her tone wasn't a question. It was an accusation. I just smiled, because years had taught me something. Some battles are won with silence. But Margaret had made me her target. I would remain silent, as always. No matter how wrongly the person across from me spoke, she was my fiancé's mother. I couldn't stoop to her level. For David's sake, I just kept silent. Throughout the wedding preparations, she interfered with every detail. "These flowers look a bit cheap," she said one day, looking at the vases I'd bought from Target. "David's first wedding was much classier," she said another day, flipping through photos. Each time I stayed calm, smiled, didn't respond. David always said the same thing. "That's just how Mom is, Charlotte. You'll get used to it." David, knowing his mother, put me at ease. I thought if she ever did something unacceptable when David wasn't around, he'd believe me when I told him. But on the wedding day, Margaret crossed the line. It was morning. The sun was shining in the garden of the small church in Maplewood. White picket fences, purple wisteria, a gentle breeze scented with jasmine. Guests were beginning to gather in the garden. I was in the dressing room with my closest friend, Lisa Bennett. As Lisa zipped up the back of my dress, the door suddenly opened. Margaret walked in. She was holding a pinkish box. "I brought you something," she said, but her voice was like a knife full of false courtesy. I opened the box. Inside was a cheap synthetic fabric shawl with lace trim. It looked like it had been cut from a carpet. She was the one who'd criticized me before. But now the gift she brought showed she meant everything she'd said. "What is this?" I asked, bewildered. "Maybe if you drape this over your shoulders, you'll look a bit more, younger," Margaret said. That condescending sparkle was in her eyes, a fake smile on her lips. What? Was I too old for her son? I couldn't believe I was hearing this from my fiancé's mother on my wedding day. Lisa's mouth hung open. I just set the shawl on the table. "Thank you, Margaret, but that won't be necessary," I said calmly. Because there was nothing I could do. I didn't want to ruin everything there. I thought Margaret would warm up to me eventually. After all, this was my second marriage, but her son's first. I could accept that she had prejudices against me. As Margaret walked toward the door, she turned and said, I hope David doesn't regret his decision today. A man is always hasty in his second marriage. That sentence stabbed like a knife. My heart raced, but my face didn't change. Lisa shouted angrily, "How dare she say that? We should tell David." But I raised my hand to stop her. "No," I said. "Not today," because something inside me had changed. I wasn't crying anymore. I was making a decision. During the ceremony, Margaret sat in the front row, next to David, possessively. When she looked at me, her eyes said, "You don't belong here." At the reception, as she mingled among the guests, she told everyone with fixed eyes how good a son David was, how he needed to find a kind and understanding woman. Some guests heard. Some smiled, some lowered their heads. I just kept smiling. We cut the cake, we danced, we took photos. But inside, I was burning. That evening, when we returned to the hotel in Silver Lake District, David said, "Mom was a bit tense today." He was looking in the mirror as he loosened his tie. You know, elderly people are like that. Change is hard for them. He must have been talking this way because he didn't know what she'd said. "David," I said calmly. My voice was flat. "Your mother humiliated me. On my own wedding day. In front of the guests." "You're exaggerating, Charlotte," he said, turning to look at me. "She's just trying to get used to you. That's how Mom is. She always speaks a bit, sharply, but she means well." In that moment, I realized David would never believe me. Either he didn't want to see it, or he couldn't. Both led to the same place. I was alone. On the first day of my marriage, I was alone. This was my greatest fear, because this was my second marriage. If this marriage went badly, I'd be done with this life. The next morning, David went to work. Despite being retired, he still consulted for old clients. I stayed home. I made my coffee, opened my laptop, and started learning everything about Margaret Hayes. Because when a woman decides to take revenge, she calculates everything. And I was a woman who'd known how to calculate for years. I didn't want to do this, but I had no choice. Margaret ran a small real estate office in Pinecrest County. She was active on social media, had a voice on the neighborhood committee, went to St. Mary's Church every week. Outwardly, she was a respectable woman. But I knew everyone has a weak point. And I was going to find hers. I didn't sleep that night. I just planned. For the first week, I did nothing. I just observed. Every morning, as David went to work, I sat at my laptop. I was examining Margaret Hayes' life second by second. Because when a woman decides to find the truth, no detail is too small. I was sure I'd find things about her that she wouldn't want others to know. Margaret's real estate office was a small shop on Main Street in downtown Pinecrest County. The window read, "Hayes Realty, your dream home awaits." Inside was narrow, filled with old furniture. From the outside, it looked like a modest but organized business. But I knew how to look beneath the surface. I combed through her social media accounts one by one. Margaret's Facebook was filled with the image of a perfect American woman. Church events, charity dinners, neighborhood picnic photos. She was smiling in every photo, writing "God bless you" in every comment. But Instagram showed a different picture. Luxury restaurants, expensive bags, shopping bags from Macy's. "A little gift for myself," she'd written under one photo. The gift was a $3,000 bag. The real estate office hadn't been doing well for the last 2 years. I read the Google reviews. "Unprofessional," one person wrote. "Late for appointments, doesn't answer the phone," wrote another. The star rating was 2 out of 5, but on social media, Margaret still appeared to be a successful businesswoman. That's when I realized I needed to dig deeper. I called an old colleague. Tom Brennan worked at a banking firm and sometimes did private investigations. "Tom," I said on the phone, "I'm going to give you a name. I want everything you can find about this person's financial situation." "Just curious, Charlotte," he asked with a slight laugh. "No," I said. "I'm planning." Tom called me 3 days later. "Charlotte, sit down somewhere," he said. "I've got files to send you, but be careful. This woman is in serious trouble." When I opened the files, my coffee cup trembled in my hand. Margaret Hayes' real estate office had been opened with money inherited from David's father. That was 20 years ago. But business had never gone well. In the last 5 years, she'd only sold 8 houses. Office rent was unpaid. She owed suppliers. She had $40,000 in credit card debt. And most importantly, she'd received several warning letters from the IRS. There were inconsistencies in her tax returns. Some income hadn't been reported. In other words, this woman was involved in all kinds of fraud. But this didn't surprise me. I'd expect anything from the woman who'd said those things to me. But there was something even more interesting. In the last 6 months, Margaret had taken money from David 3 times. $5,000 each time, $15,000 total. David hadn't told me anything. I didn't think this was normal in a marriage. Him sending money to his mother without my knowledge, especially large amounts, didn't sit well with me at all. This would shake the foundation of our marriage. So if the same thing happened to you, how would you talk to your husband? That evening, when David came home, I asked him, "David, is your mother asking you for money?" He stopped. As he was hanging up his jacket, he turned and looked at me. "How do you know?" "Just answer," I said. "Yes," he said, shrugging. "The office has expenses, you know." I helped out a bit. "Is that a problem?" "How much?" I asked. 15,000, he said. "It's not a huge amount, Charlotte. She's my mother." "And you didn't tell me," I said calmly. "Because I knew you'd react this way," he said, raising his voice. "You make everything a problem. Mom's in a tough spot and I helped. It's that simple." "Tough spot?" I said. "David, your mother is posting about $3,000 bags on social media. She's eating at luxury restaurants, but she's using your money. Your mother is jealous of our marriage, David. She doesn't like me. I still can't forget what she said to me at the wedding." "You're exaggerating," he said. "Mom's not like that, but I was certain now." David didn't want to see his mother for who she was, or he couldn't, and Margaret knew it. The next day, I decided to hire a private investigator. Jake Morrison was a well-known investigator in Austin. I asked him to follow Margaret. "What are we looking for?" he asked. "Everything," I said. "Where she goes, who she meets with, what she does. I want to know everything." 2 weeks later, Jake sent me a file. Inside were photos, records, and notes. Every afternoon, Margaret went to Costco. But she wasn't shopping there. She was meeting with a man, Richard Palmer, 62 years old, a retired contractor. In the photos, Margaret and Richard were drinking coffee together, laughing, holding hands. After the problems at her shop, this didn't surprise me at all. Anything could be expected from this woman. But what was really interesting was something else. Richard had transferred money to Margaret's real estate office twice. $20,000 total, and these transfers coincided with the dates of David's assistants. Margaret was giving the money she took from David to Richard, and Richard was paying it back. The cycle worked like this. But why? I needed to find out why she was giving all this money to Richard. I read Jake's notes. Richard Palmer has bought 3 houses in the last 2 years, all through Margaret Hayes' office. Prices above market value. Probably fake sales, I understood now. Margaret was taking money from David, giving it to Richard. Richard was making fake house sales to make the money look clean. Then the money came back to Margaret. It was a classic money laundering scheme, and David had no idea. My poor husband, his mother was a complete fraud and he had no clue. But there was something worse. Margaret constantly made David feel guilty. "I worked so hard for you," she'd tell him. "After your father died, I raised you alone. Now I need a little help, but you're not thinking about me." David believed her every time, because Margaret was a master manipulator. That evening, I decided to tell David everything. I put the files on the table, the photos, the bank records, Jake's notes. "David, look at this," I said, but David didn't look. "Charlotte, what are you doing?" he said angrily. "Did you have my mother followed?" "Yes," I said, "because she's using you. Have you lost your mind?" He shouted, "She's my mother. You have no right to judge her." "David, look at these photos," I said. "She's meeting with another man." "Your money, enough!" he shouted. He threw the files. Papers scattered on the floor. "If you say one more word about my mother, this marriage is over, Charlotte. Make your choice. This is the worst thing in a marriage, when your husband won't listen to you, as if his mother can never make a mistake. According to him, I was the one at fault for everything. In that moment, I realized David would never support me. In his eyes, Margaret was an angel, and I was just a stranger, but I wasn't going to give up, because I wasn't crying anymore. I was planning. The next morning, I called Jake again. "Find more," I said. "Everything. Every wrong thing Margaret Hayes has done. Every mistake. I want it all." "Charlotte," Jake said, "this woman is your mother-in-law. Are you sure?" I've never been more sure, I said, because when I opened that file, it wasn't my heart that broke. It was my patience. The plan unfolds. The plan began with a morning coffee. I wrapped my hands around the cup, steam rising to my face. I looked out the window at Maplewood Street. White picket fences, green lawns, a perfect American suburb. But I was no longer part of this peace, because I'd declared war, and I was going to win this war. The latest files from Jake Morrison sat on the table. Everything about Margaret Hayes' last 5 years was there. Fake real estate sales, her relationship with Richard Palmer, money taken from David, unpaid taxes, IRS warnings. All of it. But I needed to know how to use it. Because I didn't just want to harm Margaret. I wanted to completely destroy her. The first step was meeting with a tax attorney. Linda Chen was one of the best tax law experts in Austin. When I went to her office, I laid the files in front of her. This woman has serious problems with her taxes, I said. How do I report her to the IRS? Linda looked through the files. She frowned. This is serious, she said. Fake sales, unreported income, signs of money laundering. You can file an anonymous tip with the IRS. You fill out Form 3949A, but the evidence needs to be solid. It's solid, I said. Everything I got from Jake Morrison is here. Bank records, photos, sales documents. Linda nodded. Okay. I'll prepare this file and send it to the IRS. But know this, Charlotte. If this woman gets investigated, her life will become hell. Penalties, fines, maybe even prison. Are you sure? I looked her in the eyes. I've never been more sure. If you were in my position, would you stay silent? Or would you take justice into your own hands? The second step was protecting myself. Because if Margaret went down, David could be hurt too. The money he gave her could be questioned in court. So I met with a divorce attorney. Alan Fitzpatrick was a well-known lawyer in Silver Lake District. My husband is giving money to his mother, I said. But this money is being used in illegal activities. If the situation comes to light, will I be held responsible? Alan took notes. If you had no knowledge of it and you can prove it, no. But precautions need to be taken. You should separate joint accounts. And you need to work with a financial advisor to clarify the source of the money David gave his mother. I understand, I said. But what happens in case of divorce? Alan paused. Are you considering divorce? I am, I said. Because David had chosen his mother, not me. And a woman can't stay with a man who doesn't choose her. I always approached him with kindness, but David never looked at me. He always chose his mother. I didn't want to stay married to someone who couldn't see his mother's faults. The third step was the neighborhood committee. Margaret was vice president of the Pinecrest County Neighborhood Association. Every week she attended meetings, made decisions, was known as a respected name in the neighborhood. But I wanted to destroy that image. I started attending committee meetings. At the first meeting, when Margaret saw me, her eyes widened. Charlotte, what a surprise, she said with a fake smile. David's new wife, she introduced me to the other members. There was condescension in her tone. But I smiled. Yes, I'm Charlotte, I said. And I want to be more active here. Margaret was uncomfortable. But she couldn't say anything. For weeks, I listened quietly. I recorded every word Margaret said, every suggestion. And one day I caught my opportunity. At the meeting, the budget for renovating the neighborhood park was being discussed. Margaret said Hayes Realty could make a donation, $5,000. But I knew. Margaret's office didn't have $5,000. She was just showing off. After the meeting, I spoke with the committee president, Susan Rodriguez. Susan, I'm wondering if Margaret's donation will actually come through, I said. Because as far as I know, Hayes Realty is in financial trouble. Susan was surprised. How do you know? From public records, I said. Look at the Google reviews. The office has only made a few sales in the last 2 years. The budget isn't holding up. Susan did research that night. She called me the next day. Charlotte, you were right. Margaret's office really is in bad shape. It looks like she won't be able to make the donation. I know, I said. But Margaret wants to appear strong and successful to everyone. Maybe she's hiding the truth. At the next meeting, Susan asked Margaret, Margaret, are you sure about the donation? Because we have some concerns. Margaret turned bright red. Of course I'm sure, she said. I always keep my word. But 2 weeks later, the donation didn't come. Margaret said, there's a small cash flow problem at the office with embarrassment. Susan and the other members looked at her strangely. Her image was beginning to crack. The fourth step was Richard Palmer. Using Jake's photos, I followed Richard. One afternoon, I ran into him in the Costco parking lot. "Mr. Palmer," I said, "can I talk to you?" Richard was surprised. "Who are you?" "Charlotte Miller," I said. "Margaret Hayes' daughter-in-law, and I know about your relationship with Margaret." Richard's face went ashen. "What do you want?" "The truth," I said. "Margaret is taking money from my husband, and I know you're helping her. Fake real estate sales, money laundering, all of it." Richard trembled. She asked me for help. She had debts." "I know," I said, "but now the IRS is involved, and they're going to find out everything. You have a choice. Either you cooperate with me or you talk to them." 2 days later, Richard sent me a document. It was a detailed record of every transaction he'd made with Margaret. Fake sales, money transfers, all of it. It was like a confession letter. Now I had everything, all the weapons I needed to take down Margaret Hayes, and it was time to use those weapons. One morning I said to David, "David, we need to talk to your mother. All of us together." "Why?" he asked. "Because there are things she needs to learn," I said. "And if you love me, you'll come to this meeting." David reluctantly agreed. We invited Margaret to our house. When she entered the living room, she saw me and frowned. "What's this, Charlotte? A family meeting?" "No, Margaret," I said. I put the files on the table. "This is a truth-revealing meeting." And that morning, Margaret Hayes' life began to change. Because nothing would ever be the same again. Because everything she'd done was about to be exposed. Do you know when a woman becomes powerful? When she's no longer afraid. Margaret looked at the files on the table. Her face first tensed with shock, then wrinkled with anger. "What is this?" she asked, her voice carrying both disdain and worry. "This is your life," I said calmly. I opened one of the files. "Here are the warning letters you received from the IRS. Here are the fake real estate sales you made with Richard Palmer. Here's the money you took from David and how you used it. It's all here, Margaret. Everything." Margaret's face went ashen. David looked at me in shock. "Charlotte, what does this mean?" he asked. "It means," I said, turning to him, "that your mother has been using you for the last 2 years. The money she took from you, she's been using in illegal activities. She's been making fake real estate sales with a man named Richard Palmer, laundering money, and you, unaware of all this, kept giving her money." David took the files. He examined the bank records, the photos, Jake's notes. His hands were shaking. "Mom," he said, his voice hoarse. "Is this true?" Margaret stood up. "Nonsense," she shouted. "This woman is trying to turn you against me, David. Don't you see that? She's a liar." "Margaret," I said calmly, "a private investigator named Jake Morrison followed you for 2 weeks. Here are photos of you meeting Richard at Costco. Here are the bank records. Here's Richard's confession in his own words. It's all here." David read Richard's confession letter. His eyes filled with tears. "Mom, you deceived me." Margaret desperately said, "David, listen to me. I was just trying to save the office. Richard helped. Yes, maybe I made some mistakes, but—" "Mistakes!" David shouted. I'd never seen him this angry in my life. "You've been using me for years. You took money from me. You lied to me. You made me feel guilty. And now you're trying to make my wife, my savior, look like a liar." Margaret's eyes filled with tears. But I knew. These tears weren't real. They were just one last play. "David," I said softly, "now you need to make a decision. Either you stand by your mother or you stand by the truth." David stayed silent for a long time. Then he looked at Margaret. "Mom," he said, "you're no longer part of my life. I will no longer accept you asking me for money, manipulating me, or belittling my wife. Leave, and don't come back." Margaret's mouth hung open. "David, I'm your mother." "No," David said. "You're just a stranger now." Margaret grabbed her purse and walked to the door. But before leaving, she turned to me. There was hatred in her eyes. "You're going to regret what you did, Charlotte," she said. "No, Margaret," I said. "You're the one who's going to regret it." And she left. The door closed. David collapsed into the chair. He put his head in his hands. "How did I not see it?" he said. "How was I so blind?" I sat next to him. I held his hand. "Because she was your mother, David, and we don't want to see the faults of those we love. But now you've seen, and that's enough." David turned to me. His eyes were tearful. "I could have lost you, Charlotte. I could have chosen her over you, and I could have made the biggest mistake of my life. But you didn't," I said, "and that's what matters." That night, for the first time in a long while, David and I really talked. I told him everything: how I planned, how I investigated, how I waited patiently. David apologized, again and again. "I didn't listen to you," he said. "I didn't believe you, and I left you alone. But now you're with me," I said, "and that changes everything." The next week, the IRS began investigating Margaret's real estate office. The files Linda Chen sent were taken seriously by the authorities. When Margaret went to her office, 2 federal agents were waiting for her. All her records were seized. Bank accounts were frozen. Richard Palmer was also questioned. 2 months later, Margaret Hayes was tried for tax evasion and money laundering. The trial was held at Pinecrest County Courthouse. David and I sat in the back rows. When Margaret came forward, she was no longer the old Margaret. No makeup, no high heels, none of that arrogant look. There was just an old, tired, and defeated woman. The judge read his decision. "Ms. Hayes, you are found guilty. $60,000 in fines and 2 years probation." Margaret's knees buckled. She cried, but I felt nothing, because this wasn't revenge, this was justice. As we left the courthouse, Margaret saw me. She didn't look at me. She just lowered her head and walked away. In that moment, when our eyes met, she finally understood who had won. Hayes Realty closed a month later. Margaret had to sell her office. She had to sell her house in Pinecrest County, too. She moved into a small apartment. She resigned from the neighborhood committee. She closed her social media accounts. She'd become invisible. David slowly healed. Losing his mother had wounded him deeply. But over time, he understood that she'd never really been a real mother. She was just a manipulator. "You know," he said one day as we sat in the garden, "you saved me, Charlotte. If it weren't for you, I'd still be believing her games. Maybe I would have lost all my money. Maybe I would have lost you. But you didn't lose me," I said. I squeezed his hand. "Because I didn't give up on you." David smiled. "Do you know when a woman becomes powerful?" "Tell me," I said. "When she's no longer afraid," he said. A new beginning. 6 months later, our life returned to normal. David no longer sends money to his mother. He doesn't call her. He doesn't do anything. And this gives him peace. As for me, I returned to my architecture work. I'm working on new projects in my office in Austin. And I've noticed something. My battle with Margaret made me stronger. I no longer allow anyone to belittle me, manipulate me, or look down on me. Because I'm a quiet but powerful woman. And powerful women are never defeated. Sometimes I see Margaret on the street, going to her apartment, shopping, walking alone. She doesn't look at me because she's ashamed, and I don't pity her because she created her own ending. That day, I didn't hear justice. I felt it. In my heart, in my soul, in every cell. Real justice doesn't come with shouting. It comes quietly, and its echo lasts for years. Today, I'm sitting in our house on Maplewood Street. The sun filters through the curtains. My coffee is freshly brewed. David is pruning roses in the garden. Life is peaceful. Life is beautiful. Life is as it should be. And looking back, I understand something. Revenge wasn't a dark path. It was the path to justice. I didn't want to destroy Margaret. I just revealed the truth. And the truth destroyed her with her own hand. When a woman is betrayed, she has two choices. Either she falls or she stands. I chose to stand, and that choice saved my life. Real justice isn't revenge, it's being able to walk in peace. A question for you. What would you have done? Would you have stayed silent, or would you have taken action? Was revenge sweet, or was silence? Do you know when a woman becomes powerful? When she's no longer afraid? This story isn't just a story. It's a reflection of the injustices that happen every day in real life. And sometimes, justice doesn't come from the courts. It comes from the hands of brave women. If this story moved you, if you admired Charlotte's courage, if you want justice to be heard more, don't forget to subscribe, because stories of justice don't spread silently, they spread together. Real justice is silent, but its echo lasts for years.